Hi, my name is Peter and I'm Participation Manager at Site Gallery. Today's webinar is going to be led by Lucy Cheesman. Lucy, before we get started, can you just tell us a little bit about FoxDot and what FoxDot means to you and why it's a cool piece of software?
Yeah, so FoxDot is a piece of software developed by somebody called Ryan Kirkbride, and it's for live coding music. So you can write some code, some simple code, and generate beats and melodies really easily. One of the reasons I love it so much is that it's super easy to learn. It's based in Python, so it's quite a familiar language, and the syntax is really simple and gives you a huge amount of flexibility for playing with sounds.
Great. And what can people expect to learn if they follow through this video?
So we'll be covering the basics of FoxDot, so how to launch FoxDot, how it interacts with supercollider, which is a sound engine. We'll learn how to create patterns out of samples and synths, and we'll learn a little bit about how to use keywords to create effects.
What's special about FoxDot compared to other types of music software?
I would say one of the great things about FoxDot is it's really beginner friendly. So it keeps everything in time for you. It keeps everything in key for you. So you can focus on the sound that you're making. It's quite hard to break, so it doesn't crash very often, like a lot of live coding software. And that means you can feel quite comfortable to experiment. And I guess the final thing is that once you've kind of got your head around how the different keywords and arguments work, which is quite simple, you can combine them in kind of infinite different ways, and it's all very logical and sounds great.
Brilliant.
Great. Okay, so this workshop is called Turn Your House into an Instrument. I think that's what Peter called it. The first part, we're going to learn a little bit about using a piece of software called FoxDot, which is live coding software to sequence samples and synthesizers. Then we're going to go away and record loads of sounds around our house, and then we're going to put those into FoxDot and use those to compose some music. So that's what we'll be doing in the session next week. So the schedule today, we've had the install party, which obviously we had some technical issues, so apologies to people who haven't managed to get installed. I think that it shouldn't matter too much because the workshop today is it's nice if you could be hands-on, but also there'll be plenty of opportunities for you to get hands-on after today. So I'm going to spend hopefully not quite 30 minutes doing welcome and intro. So I know we're already, I don't know, what time is it? 10 minutes in or something like that. So I'm going to talk you through what we're going to do today and where you get your worksheets from and stuff like that. Then we'll spend about half an hour looking at kind of basic patterns and effects in FoxDot. So how to get started, what the basic syntax looks like, the different sounds you can make and how they work. Then we're going to take about 15-minute breaks. People can have a cup of tea, step outside for some fresh air, whatever they need to do. And then we're going to spend about another half an hour looking at a little bit more complicated stuff in FoxDot. So how to make things sound more interesting, how to create some more interesting rhythms and different effects and things like that. And then just at the end, I'm going to do just about 15 minutes to just show you a really basic bit of sound editing. So thinking about when you go around the house and record your samples, how you can then get them in the right format to put into FoxDot. There's also a load of details about that on the worksheet that I'm going to send around, and I'll be available by email in the week to help if anyone struggles with that. But yeah, it's more just to kind of show you Audacity and what it looks like, so it's not completely unfamiliar to you when you start to load some sounds into it. So in preparation, oh yeah, I already mentioned the Zoom etiquette, but just to remind you, if you've got questions, everybody's on mute and I can't see your videos. So if you've got questions, please hit the Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom and I will try to respond to those in the way that's most appropriate. There's a link on screen at the minute, this tinyurl.com/fox.site. And that's got that link will take you to the FoxDot worksheet. So if we click that, you should get a screen that looks something like this, which is just a link to my Google Drive. So you'll see some code appearing here. What I'd like you to do is to download this using the download button up here. I'm just going to do it so you can see what I'm doing, although I've probably already got it. and that means you get that file in your download folder. So and we can open that in FoxDot. So I've already got it open here, but I'll show you how to do it. So within FoxDot, to open a file, to load some code up, you go to File, Open, and go navigate to your Downloads folder and open that file. So I'm not going to start the explanations of FoxDot stuff yet, but just so you know, this worksheet is basically your workspace. So you can do whatever you want in here. You can run any of the code, you can change it, you can put your own stuff in here. If you want to save what you've done, you can save it. If you want to scrap it, you can download a new version of the file, and everything will be there. So it's just so you haven't got to spend loads of time typing. So as we go through, I'll be working through the examples in this worksheet. So if you've got FoxDot up and running at home, you can kind of work along with me, or you can do it in your own time and go through it. You can make notes in here, and I'll go through all of that in a little bit more detail. But just so you know, you can do what you want with that sheet. It's a resource for you. Yeah, what's this workshop about basically? So today we've got about 2 hours together. We're going to go through the basics of making music with code using FoxDot. So FoxDot is a piece of software developed by my friend Ryan Kirkbride, who is this guy in the middle here. Maybe can I annotate like I don't know if you can see what I'm doing, but anyway, I'm pointing at Ryan's face. Here he is. And it's based in Python, and it's a very simple Python library that lets you send messages to another piece of software that you'll have installed called supercollider. And supercollider is a very complicated piece of software that makes sound. So you could use supercollider for any kind of sound manipulation. People do loads of amazing stuff with it. I don't really understand how it works very well. It's quite complicated. But I can use FoxDot, and I use FoxDot to send messages to supercollider, and then supercollider makes the sounds that we're going to hear today. A lot of people use it for live performances, FoxDot. So writing code live on stage. As you can see, this is my band Type here, and our friend Antonio, who's doing visuals over here. So the three of us, this is Laurie and Ryan and me, make music together in FoxDot, and we type code and we run code, and it makes beats and melodies live. And you may have heard of live coding or not, but it's a bit niche. People like to say things like, oh, it's the future of dance music, but I think it's the future of dance music to about 12 people globally. So that's what we're going to do today. Then we've got another session next week. So in the interim period, obviously because we're all stuck at home during the lockdown, I want you to try to find some sounds around your house that can be used as instruments. And we're going to take these, we're going to record lots of samples, put them into FoxDot, and then next week we're going to use those to compose some music using those sounds. I actually, they were available. I recorded some little sounds in my house this morning while I was having a cup of coffee, so I'll play you those later. Actually, I won't do it now. So you can see the kind of thing I'm thinking, but really anything, I want people to get as creative as possible and see how inventive people can get with that, with the limited resources. So those of you who've managed to install stuff, you'll have noticed there were like lots of different things that you needed to install. So you installed Git, possibly. You install Python, you install supercollider. Python is programming language. It's really popular. It's used for loads of different stuff. I don't know much about it. I just really use FoxDot. FoxDot's a library of Python. Supercollider is a sound engine, as I described, and Git is just a like code versioning management tool. But the only reason you really needed to install Git today was so that supercollider could get some code from the internet for you. So you don't need to worry about it too much. And now that you've kind of got that code, you could probably happily uninstall Git from your computer if you wanted to. That's that. I could talk about that quite a lot already. So the next part is about starting FoxDot. So there are kind of two things you need to do to make sound with FoxDot. So the first one is to launch supercollider. And then within that, you run this foxdot.start command. And that basically loads a script in supercollider that tells supercollider to listen to messages from FoxDot. So supercollider, it's almost like, imagine it's like an orchestra. So FoxDot is like the conductor and supercollider is like the band. So FoxDot gives messages to the supercollider about, you know, like how fast to play, or maybe what pattern to play, or what piece to play, which hopefully will become a lot clearer when we start working with it. And supercollider actually makes a sound. you have to launch supercollider and run this FoxDot.start command first before you launch the FoxDot text editor. Otherwise, sometimes it works, but it usually crashes when you do if you do it the other way around. So you open supercollider, which will look like, I'll show you on my screen. Your supercollider probably looks a bit different from mine because I changed the colors on mine. Yours is probably all white. And you type in this FoxDot.start line and you hit Control and Enter, which I'm not going to do now because it's already running for me. If you're on a Mac, you hit Command and Enter. Shout out to Naomi for telling me what that was the other day when I was helping her by email. And if you want to, you can run this s.scope command, which opens the little stethoscope, which when we play some music will show you some sound waves in here. I just think that is kind of a neat little function. I use it quite a lot for troubleshooting. Oh, someone's in the Q&A, but it's the same Q&A we had before, so that's okay. Once you've done that, and that's all running, oh yeah, I should show you as well. If you run, when you run this FoxDot.start, you'll know it's worked if you see these kind of little green numbers in the bottom right hand of supercollider. If they're yellow or white, or indeed I think they can even go red, it means something's gone wrong. You also might see a message like something like listening to messages from FoxDot. It might not post that if you're on a Mac, I don't know. And hopefully that'll all just work. Supercollider also has this post window that will show you various messages if there's errors, but they're often not that helpful. So don't worry about those too much. So once you have done that, you then need to open either command prompt if you're on Windows or a terminal if you're on Mac or Linux. And in there, you need to run Python space -m space FoxDot with a capital F and a capital D. And that should launch your FoxDot text editor. If you have got Python 3, or if you had to do pip 3 when you were doing install, you might need to write Python 3 FoxDot here. But again, I can handle any kind of technical troubleshooting like that once we've kind of got through some of the explanations. So it's just something to be aware of if you're struggling. And that should then open you a text editor that, looks like this. So this is the Python text editor here. In fact, maybe I should just share like that. Better. And if you load up a worksheet like I've got in here, it'll look like this, or it might just look like a blank page like this, in which case you could just type freely into it. So often when you see people performing live coding sets, they'll start with a completely blank page, but other people you'll see have got some code that they've written in advance. I personally think it's fine to write your code in advance because it saves you a lot of typing, particularly if you're like not that accurate of a typist. Like myself, my typing skills are not great, so I make a lot of typos. So sometimes it's good to just have some stuff pre-written and then you can kind of copy and paste or copy what you've done if you can't remember all your syntax. So I'm going to open up the worksheet again. So I don't know why it says by Thierry there. It looks like, I don't know what that is, little typo. See, I told you I wasn't very good at typing. So I think in terms of introductions, that's all I wanted to go through. Oh yeah, there's some contact and support details here, but I'll post those up at the end, and I'll get Peter to share this presentation round with people as well, so that everyone has access to that at home if they need any of the links or anything like that. But basically the support is me by email. Please feel free to email me at any time. I'm also on Twitter, Able States, and there is this website called TopLap, which stands for something like the Temporary Organisation for the Promotion of Live something. But it's a big live coding website, and there's loads of information here, but there's also a forum which has a FoxDot area where you can kind of ask questions, and you'll probably get a response from Ryan, who is the FoxDot creator. He's the main person who kind of maintains that. Right. So is that okay? I'll just check the Q&A. Has anyone got any questions at this point? Or are we okay? So it's slightly sooner than 1:30, which is when I wanted to start my explanations, which is good. So I will start my explanations now. So for those of you who've got FoxDot installed, please feel free to kind of follow along on your own machine, or you can just watch and listen and do it in your own time. It's totally up for you. If people have got questions, shout in the Q&A. And Peter, would you mind keeping an eye on the Q&A and like direct my attention to it if I haven't noticed that there's a question in there? Because I think when I've got my screen up, I can't necessarily keep an eye on everything at once. So I'm hoping, I did test the audio with Peter earlier. I'm hoping that it's going to work. Let me just check I'm sharing my audio, yes. So can you hear that drum beat? Peter, do you hear it? All right, hopefully everyone can. If you can't hear it, please post in the Q&A and say, I can't hear it. So this worksheet, I should also say, was, well, it's been very heavily adapted by me, but originally it was written by Ryan, so I've prepped him up here. He's a very good teacher. But it's divided into different sections, so I'm going to run through those bit by bit. And as I said before, feel free to edit or change anything in here. If you mess it up, you can always download a fresh copy. If you want to save what you've done and save your code, you just go to File and Save As, and it'll save it as a .py, which is a Python file. And then you can load that up again in supercollider, in FoxDot, when you want to come back and look at your code again. It will try, like if you just quit it, I think it tries to save your code for next time, but it doesn't always do it. So I wouldn't rely on that. I'd make sure you save if you want to save what you've done. This first little bit is just to remind you that you need to run FoxDot.start in supercollider before anything else, but we've done that, hopefully. So we'll start looking at the code in FoxDot. So you'll notice, first of all, that everything's kind of different colors. If you see these lines that have got a hash in front of them, it makes that a comment. So if people who are not familiar with coding, comments are bits of text that the computer won't read as code. So if you want to leave any notes to yourself as we go through the worksheet, you can leave them with this hash symbol, and you can even put them at the end of a line of code. So I'll be like, this is a drum beat, and then if I run that, it'll play the line of code, but it'll just kind of ignore the part that's in gray, which is after the hash. If I didn't put the hash, I'd get an error. So you can see in FoxDot down here, it has this post window that posts errors. They're not massively helpful for figuring out what's gone wrong, to be honest. But I think the kind of color coding helps you quite a lot. So what you can see here is when I put the hash, it colors that bit of text as gray. So it's kind of grayed out. The computer won't listen to it. So that's about comments. Please feel free to comment wildly. I mean, obviously you can type stuff down here. As long as you don't run that line of code, it's not going to do anything, but it's just good practice to kind of use your comments to make it clear what part are notes to yourself and what parts of the code are actual code. So this is our most simple player. So this is a play instrument, and what this does is it will play us samples. So I kind of go through the anatomy of this line of code so you can see what's going on. So D1, we could put any kind of 2 characters here. So these characters, 2 characters are basically the name of the player. Well, there's something happening in the chat.
That's okay, I'm talking to her.
Okay, cool. So you can call that whatever you want. You could call it L1, PP, Z3, whatever. But every kind of line that you want to play separately needs to have a different name. So if you give 2 things a different name, the same name, it'll just overwrite one with the other. So for example, I do that and then I go. It stopped the drum bit and it started playing the other one. Whereas if I call the D1 and D2, it plays them both at the same time. So that's just something worth bearing in mind while you're kind of working through things. Then we use these 2 arrows, which you'll see in every line of code in FoxDot, which are the 2 kind of greater than arrows. And they just say, okay, take D1 and make it this player. And then we define the player after that. So in this instance, we're using a player called play, which is a sample player, and we'll use that for all of our samples. There are also various synth players, but we'll learn about those in a little bit, so don't worry about them for now. So every player in FoxDot has a name. This one's called play. And then after that, you open brackets to put in the arguments that tell that player what to do. So play is the player is like an instrument. So this one's called play. Imagine it like a kind of drum machine, basically. And within those brackets, there are various arguments go into there. And this is a really simple line of code at the minute. It's only got one argument, which is this string, which is basically just a series of characters within speech marks. And you can put any letters you want in here. And each one of these will play a different sample. So here we've got the X, which is like a kick drum sample. The hyphen is a hi-hat. The O is a snare. And the hyphen is a hi-hat again. So you get like a kind of 4-beat pattern, which sounds like this. So it's quite nice. You can put whatever you want in here. So any letters, numbers, or symbols, and they're all mapped to a different sample. So when we eventually come to put our own sounds in, we'll map our sounds to characters, and then we'll use those characters in the play player to play them. So uppercase and lowercase letters have different sounds as well. So you can hear and you can use a space to leave a rest as well. I've put 4 things in here, which has made a 4-beat pattern, but you can put as many different things in here as you want. So you're not constrained to creating patterns that are 4 beats long or in 4/4. You can kind of mess about with that as however you want. At the minute, it's just kind of playing these samples 1 per beat. We'll learn a little bit later about how to kind of go outside of that and do stuff on half beats or quarter beats or whatever kind of durations that you want. So if you're at home, please try like running this code. So you run the code with Control and Enter or Command and Enter, same as you do in supercollider. And try typing some different stuff in between the speech marks. I think I've got some examples here. I'll put Site Gallery, who's looking after us today. And if you want to stop the sound playing, you can use either this stop command where you put the name of the player, so whatever you've defined that as, .stop, and then open close brackets. So we'll see how that works. That'll stop one player. So if I had 2 things playing at the same time, let's see. So I'll have my clicks playing. So it stopped the D1 player, which is this Site Gallery one, and it's carried on playing my clicks, which are the H's down here. You can stop everything at once by pressing Control and full stop or Command and full stop if you're on a Mac. Or you can type a line of code, which is clock.clear, open and close brackets, and that'll do the same thing. That'll stop everything. So you'll notice when I press Control and full stop, it's running this clock.clear line down here. So it's kind of the same. It's just a shortcut for doing the same thing. I like about basically every gig we play, I accidentally press Control and full stop in the middle of the set, and it shuts everything off. And then you have to pretend you did it on purpose, like bring everything back in, because I don't know, for some reason, like I think because the full stop is right above Control, like I hit them both with my thumb at the same time instead of doing Control and Enter. So try not to do that, but it's fine if you do. I guess you just start out. So that's kind of the basics for playing samples. Like I said, if you've got FoxDot running at home, have a go just typing some different stuff in. Remember that spaces are rests, and you could also do like, I don't know what they are. These sounds, those symbols have got sounds as well, I think. I don't think that pound sign or anything associated with it. Yeah, oh, that's nice. I like that and. That's a nice sound. Yeah, have a little play with that. And the very basics, you could do quite a lot just with that, to be honest, even if you don't learn anything else today. That's a really handy bit of functionality. All right, so we're going to roll on and learn a little bit about synths. So typically you'd use samples to create like a drum beat or similar, but you can also use samples to do kind of melodic stuff as well. So if you have samples of, say, a vocal sample or a sample of like a synth line or a guitar part or whatever, you can kind of repitch those and use those to create melody as well, which I do quite a lot. But the typical way you'd create melody using FoxDot is with these synth players. So there are loads of different sounds available in FoxDot already, and you can also find other ones online and add them yourself, which there's instructions online on how to do that. I won't cover that in this workshop, but if anyone's really interested in doing that, just ping me an email and I will kind of explain how that works. That's kind of advanced FoxDot, but just to let you know the possibilities are there. So we're going to start a new player here to listen to some synth sounds. So it's called P1. Again, you could call it whatever you wanted. And you'll see that the syntax is really similar to when we opened our play player to play the samples. So we have P1 space, we have our 2 arrows to define the player, and then we have the name of an instrument here, which FoxDot handily highlights in red code for you. So this is a synth called pads, sounds like this. And what you'll see is that even though we haven't given it any arguments, it has a default way of playing. So if you just want to quickly listen to what something sounds like, you could just run it with just the brackets with no arguments inside, and you can get a sense of what it sounds like. There are heaps and heaps of different arguments you can put in to both the sample player and the synths, which we're going to look at some of them during this workshop, but I'm not going to go through everything. There's loads of information online, but the basic syntax for each kind of argument and the way it works is the same. So I'm hoping that once I've showed you the basics, you'll be able to kind of go on and explore yourself if you want to learn a little bit more advanced stuff as well. So to see what instruments are available to us, we can run this line of code, which is print synth defs. And what that's going to do, it's going to post in the window at the bottom a whole big list of different synths. I would just ignore this loop play 1 and play 2 because they're kind of different types of players, but anything else down here has different sounds associated with it. So let's try it out. I've got Varsor here, which is quite nice. Marimba's one of my favourites and it's quite soft, so let's go with that for now. So what you'll notice is that even though I was changing the name of the synth and it was changing the sound, the kind of pulse and the note stayed the same. And that's because there are basically default arguments in supercollider and FoxDot where if you don't kind of define anything or tell it what to do, it kind of puts in these default notes, which I guess is a C. I actually don't know. I'm really bad at like music theory and notes and stuff as well. And it has this on the beat. So if you can see down the bottom right of FoxDot, you'll see this like little red blob is kind of counting the beat up to 4, and you'll see that it's just in time with that. Now, obviously, we might want to change the note or change the duration or lots of other things. And so we use different arguments for that. And this is the key difference between the play, like sample player, and the synth players, is that some of the arguments are slightly different. So for example, with play, we use these speech marks and we put characters inside to refer to different samples. So just remind you what it sounds like. So the ampersand and symbol is that little ping sound. When we're playing a synth, we use square brackets and numbers to refer to notes. So if you put like this inside here instead. Ooh. I mean, it kind of works actually, which I'm surprised by, but you can see that it's erroring out a little bit and you're getting this like could not convert string to float because it doesn't like these comments that we've put in. So we use the square brackets and it gives us a bit more functionality as well. So you can hear, which is what it should sound like. So you're playing basically the first, second, and third notes in the scale. FoxDot starts counting at 0. Like programming languages do this. It's a little bit confusing if you're not used to it. So actually, it's actually playing, I think, the second, third, and fourth notes in the scale. So that's the first. And that's how you add notes. And you can do that. So we have the tune, but again, if I change the synth, which is the name of the player, it'll play the same notes, but using a different sound. So it's just the same as if you're playing a keyboard and you're going like 1, 2, 3, 4 on the keys. And you're like, oh, I don't like that patch. I'm going to change it to a different one. It just changes the sound, but you're playing the same pattern. So the same notes are going to come out. And you can put any numbers in here, like you can put negative numbers, which will go lower. So that'll go to the octave below, or you can go outside of the octave, like I won't go too high because it'll probably sound really horrible. But you can also define the octave using a separate argument, which we'll learn later. So that's just a really simple way to make a melody. Again, you'll notice that it's just playing it in time with the beat of FoxDot. We haven't done anything to affect the duration or how long those notes are. Again, we're going to learn how to do that in a little bit, but you can do it. Where you're defining your notes, you can use round brackets to play a chord. So basically to play multiple notes at the same time. I'm not going to use the pad sound because I actually don't like it too much. Marimba is my favorite, so we'll go for that. So listen to the difference between this. Oops. Sing a bracket. So you can see that when you've got the square brackets, FoxDot will step through each item in that list one by one. So you'll get like notes that go do, do, do. Whereas if you've got the round brackets, it does everything inside that list at the same time. That's quite crucial. And that same syntax will be used when we start learning about different keywords and different arguments. That stuff in square brackets will happen sequentially, stuff in round brackets is going to happen at the same time. And you can combine those together. So again, well, maybe we listen to pads. So see if we can figure out what's going on in this line of code before we start listening to it. So here you've got your square bracket, so you know it's going to step through things one by one. Your commas separate each step as well. So you're going to have note 0, note 1, note 2, and then in your next step you've got round brackets. So it's going to do everything inside those round brackets at the same time within that step. So you're going to get note 0, note 1, note 2, and then you're going to get a chord of notes 3, 5, and 7. Let's listen to it. Hopefully you can hear what's going on there. And then we can kind of mix and match. So I can put another chord here. And let's put some more notes at the end as well. And let's change the sound. Let's try. Maybe not that. I just love the marimba. It's so jolly. You can also change the scale, which I think we'll probably do that. We'll probably look at that next week because it's a little more complicated. And when you're just learning the kind of basics, you don't need to worry about that kind of stuff too much. But when you're trying to compose something, obviously the scale is quite important. But it's important to note that FoxDot will try to keep everything in key for you, so you don't have to worry too much about it, which is great for me because I don't know anything about music theory. I think you can put in like, I don't know, if you put in like 0. I don't know, you might get some like weird notes. Yeah, so you can make it go like out of key. Because what it's then trying to do is, say you've got like note 1 and note 2. If you have 1.5, it tries to find the note in between note 1 and note 2. And if you do like 0.367, it tries to find 0.367 of the way between those two notes. So you can do this kind of microtonal experimental stuff if you're into that. I actually quite like stuff like that, but you know, it's not for everybody. So FoxDot will keep you in key if you want to stay in key, but you can go out of key if you want to go out of key, and you're very welcome to. No judgment from me if you play microtonal notes. Okay, sorry, I've gone a little bit of a sidetrack there. That wasn't in the worksheet at all, but there you go. That's the value you get of the webinar with me. So the other thing to note is, going back to our square brackets and round brackets, if you put stuff in square brackets, it's a list. If you put square brackets inside those square brackets, it also creates another list. So what's going to happen in this line of code here, we're opening our square brackets, so we're going to start going through the sequence. So we're going to have note 0, then we're going to have note 2. But then in our third step in the sequence, we've got another set of square brackets, which have got a 4 and a 7 within. And what it's going to do is it's going to go, the first time around, our pattern's going to go 0, 2, 4. Then it's going to go 0, 2, 7. So it's just going to alternate between those items in the list in the same way. So every time it comes to that list, it goes, right, where are we? Okay, we're on the second position. We're going to have a 7. So if we listen to it, it probably makes a little bit more sense. first time around you get the 4, and then the second time around you get the 7, which is the slightly higher note. And you can put as many different things into this list as you want, and you can do the same on any step of this pattern. So you can create something that varies quite a lot over time, but it's actually quite a simple pattern. Which admittedly doesn't sound great, but I feel like if we make it then remember it, it just sounds better. Something to note as well is that FoxDot won't run the line of code until the start of the next bar, so you don't have to worry too much about timing. So you'll notice if I run it like now, it starts when it gets around to 1 on this counter in the corner. So I'll try it again. So this is quite nice when you're performing. It kind of keeps everything in time for you, as well as trying to keep stuff in key for you. So it's pretty helpful software in that regard. The only thing that can be tricky is that sometimes if you want to try and trigger something like exactly on a point, you can run the line of code, it doesn't start straight away. And so if you're experiencing that, it's probably because FoxDot's like waiting for the next bar to start you up. I think you can actually change like the duration of this counter. I can't remember off the top of my head how to do it, but I will find out. And if anyone's interested, I will tell them. So if you wanted to do something in a different time signature other than 4, basically. Yeah, I mean, often when I'm like personally, when I'm jamming with FoxDot, I'll use like I'll mix and match different kind of lengths of patterns. So I might overlap stuff that's like 3 beats or 4 beats or 5 beats, which can create like nice variation over time. So if you're not careful, like you end up with stuff that's super repetitive, which is like can be fine, but unless you want to be like frantically typing the entire time, I find it nice to kind of build in some of that variation from the start. So anyway, those of you who are kind of playing around at home, have a little go with this. Try putting in some different numbers. Try using different brackets to play stuff at the same time or play stuff in sequence. You can nest brackets within brackets within brackets. It can get a bit hard to predict what's going to happen after a while, but also that can be like a nice creative technique. If you're a bit stuck, you can just kind of nest a load of brackets and put numbers in and see what happens. See if you can figure out what's happening, but also don't worry too much if the sequences don't necessarily make sense. Trying to think if there's anything else to add around that. I think like this seems quite basic, but it's quite important to get your head around how FoxDot kind of steps through lists and how it uses those brackets and interprets them, because it kind of has an effect on everything that we do going forward. Like this is the basic syntax that you're going to use again and again and again. Okay, so if everyone's happy, I'm going to carry on, move on to keywords. So I mentioned before that we can use all kinds of different arguments within our player to define different elements of the sound. And we basically do that using keywords. I'm pretty sure like everything is keywords except for either the samples when you're using the sample player or the notes when you're using the synth player. Actually, there is a keyword for this, which is pitch, but it just is by default knows that you mean pitch. So you don't need to type it in every time. So the syntax that you use when you're adding arguments is to put a comma in between each argument. Then you will put like the name of the keyword. So in this case, it's DUR, which is short for duration. And then you set the kind of arguments for that. So in this case, we're going to set the duration to 1, which I think is the default duration. Or we can change that. And you can see that instantly affects the sound. Actually, that pad sound, the pad sound is sounds a lot nicer when it's a longer duration. We could do this half speed one, see how that sounds. It's a little bit harsh, maybe. So what's happening here, just to step you through it, so I'm not leaving anybody behind, is we've got P1, which is the name of our player, so we should be familiar with that by now. We've seen that loads of times. We have our 2 arrows, so that defines the player. Again, that's going to be in every line of code, super familiar. We have the name of our player, which is pads, but I could change that to a different synth. So here we have the Prophet synth. In our square brackets here, we have our notes. And like we saw before, we could nest some different notes inside there, or we could put some chords as well if we felt like it. I hope you can see we can start to mix and match. Like each little bit of syntax is like a small building block, and you can completely mix and match them however you want. If you get an error, I would always advise just like stepping back one. So whatever the last change you made was, be like, okay, that's obviously the thing that has caused the error. It's really easy when you're at the end here to, like, if you're putting brackets and things in your keyword arguments, to miss the final bracket off. That's like a really common and easy mistake to make. But FoxDot does try to give you some clues with like the color coding. That's there. So we've got our dir argument. If you set it to 4, it's going to be 4 beats. If you set it to 8, it's going to be 8 beats. If you set it to a half, it's going to be a half beat. You can use fractions, or you can also use decimals. So you could do a third. Well, no, it's not a third. That's 0.3. Kind of funky. You don't need to put 0 point. You can just put 0.3. It'll understand that. But it means that if you want to do a third as a pure third, you can do that. Yeah, I'm going to put like 0.33333 recurring because you can't do that. You can, I think, mix and match like fractions and decimal numbers as well. So don't worry too much about that. If you're like really into computer science, there's like a whole load of stuff behind this about the different types of numbers it uses. I don't understand that very well myself, so I can't explain it to you, but you can go online and find out about that if you want to. If you know a bit about Python, it'll probably make a lot more sense as well in terms of how Python interprets numbers. But really, for the purposes of what we're doing today, you just need to know that you can use either fractions or decimal numbers. It doesn't matter. So dir equals 0.5. It's going to be the same as dir equals a half. So we can also use lists inside our keyword arguments as well. So where you've got your keyword arguments, you can also use your square brackets. So in this case, we're going to have a note pattern that is like 0, 1, 2, 3. Then we're going to have a duration pattern that goes 1, a half, a half. And this is where you can really start to create some variety and different kind of rhythms in your sound. So what you'll notice is that it sounds slightly different each time. And that's because we've got 4 elements in our note pattern. So 0, 1, 2, 3. But we've only got 3 elements in our duration pattern. And so what FoxDot does is it maps one to the other. So the first time round, we'll have 0, duration 1. Then we'll have 1, duration half. Then we'll have 2, duration half. Then we'll have 3, and we'll go back to the start of the duration list. So we'll have duration 1. Then we'll have 0, duration half, blah, 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 blah. If you had like 4 elements in this duration argument, it's going to sound the same each time around. But if you have different numbers of elements, it creates a longer form pattern because they overlap a number of times until they'll come back to the start. So it's a really nice way of creating variety over time. And it means you don't have to necessarily write out a really long sequence. You can just use a few numbers and it will create something that is a bit longer form. I'm hoping that makes sense. The other thing I would recommend, if you're not sure how something's going to sound or how 2 lists are going to interact or 2 patterns are going to interact, I would just say listen to it. Like type something, listen to it, see if you like the sound of it, change it if you don't. You know, it's not always that easy to sit there and logically think, okay, what is exactly this going to sound like? Or, oh, I want to make a melody that sounds exactly like this, so I'm going to sit and code it in. It's better to just kind of experiment, particularly when you're learning as well. Like I found using my ear really helped me so much understand the kinds of things I wanted to do, rather than always thinking about it in this very kind of academic, technical way. And, you know, appreciate people learn in different ways and do stuff differently. And it definitely helps if you can understand it. But I would also say at the start, don't worry too much about understanding every little thing that's going on. Like as long as you can write code that doesn't throw an error and you can use your ear to listen to what that sounds like, I would say those are like the 2 most important skills I would kind of want you to take away today. So that's the basics of keywords. I think you can also use round brackets. So I don't know what that would do for duration. Let's have a go. See what happens. I think it might just do like I don't know. Let's see. see what it sounds like. Kind of can't tell because you wouldn't necessarily be able to hear, would you? So what it's doing is where I've got this, it's basically playing everything at 1 unless I have multiple items for note, in which case it's playing one of those at 1 and one of those at 0.5. So that's a bit complicated. I would maybe not worry about that because duration, you probably really only want one duration occurring at a time anyway. Note also, like if you're just having a single thing in your list, you don't need to put the square brackets. But if I try to put 2 things here, I get an error, so I need the square brackets. I would just recommend putting the square brackets kind of for safety if you're not sure. So that's the basic syntax for keywords. There are heaps and heaps of different ones. I've put some really important ones here. So dir is our duration. Amp is our volume. So the default amp is 1. I wouldn't go louder than probably 1.5 is pretty loud. 0 is going to be silent. Sus is the sustain, so that's how long a note's held for. So dir is really how long it is between the notes are triggered. So if you have 1 as your dir, a note's going to be triggered every 1 beat. If you have your sus as 2, you're going to trigger your note every 1 beat, but it's going to be held for 2 beats. Or if you have your sus as 0.5, it's going to only hold that note for half a beat. So again, you can use that to create some nice variety. Pan creates a stereo effect. So I think -1 is left and 1 is right. They're opposites anyway. And you can do stuff in between that as well. So you could do 0 is it plays it the same in both ears. And that's going to be the default setting. You can probably hear it a lot better if you've got speakers, if you've got headphones. If you've got nice like stereo speaker set up to your laptop, then you'll hear it better. If you're just listening out of your laptop speakers, you probably won't hear that so well. And oct chooses the octave. So I can't remember the default octave. I think it's 4. Maybe I'm wrong. So you can change octave by putting in much higher and lower numbers here, but you can also control the octave using this oct keyword. So I've got this like big monster of a line here. I'm definitely not going to do. I don't know why I put pads in all these examples. The marimba's much nicer. So if you've got headphones on, you'll hear that switching between our ears. You'll hear the duration changing. Can't really hear the sus, but if I make it really short. Now, I think it's because marimba doesn't have sustain. It's just a short sound, actually. Let's try. You can also hear that a lot longer. So you can hear that has a massive effect, the sustain, on the sound. So if you have a short sound, it's not going to overlap. If you have a longer sound, obviously you're going to get this much more like blurred kind of pattern going on. So I would kind of recommend just like playing around with those keywords and having a go at creating some patterns and practicing. You know, you can use the code that's written there and just try changing some of the numbers, changing the brackets around, change the synth. Remember, if you want to see what other synths are available, you can type in, oops, not that, print synth deaths and run that line of code. And that's going to give you the list down here. So I always forget what's what. Gong's quite nice, I think. And what you'll see is that the different synths have all got different characters. So some of them are these kind of long sounds like glass or space. Snick's got this kind of delay effect to it. I mean, they're kind of descriptive sounds, so you should probably be able to figure most of them out and see where you kind of get to. And you'll notice that some sounds like slightly louder than others, or some sounds are kind of got a softer attack or a harsher attack. So you can use them for kind of different effects. So I'd really recommend just like having a bit of a play around with that at home when you can and see what's going on. So, right, we did keywords. So just to quickly recap, it's not been that long, but I'll just refresh everyone's memory anyway. We learned about basic players. So we learned about the sample player, which is called play, and we learned about synths, which have different names. We learned about the syntax of square and round brackets, so how square brackets create a list that FoxDot steps through one by one, and how round brackets create a list that FoxDot does everything in that list at the same time. We also learned about keywords, so we learned about duration, sustain, amp, pan, and oct. So amp is the amplitude, which is the volume. Dur is the duration, which is how often a note's triggered. Sus is the sustain, which is how long that note's held for. Pan is the pan left or right, so which speaker you're going to hear the sound out of. And oct refers to the octave of the note, so it's just a shorthand for varying the pitch in a kind of big way rather than a small way. I feel like I kind of rushed through that a little bit, but we're going to have more time next week to look at how we kind of use those things when we're composing. So how we'd actually use those practically. So I guess the main thing now is just to be aware of them, and you can kind of copy and paste that to have a go with those at home. And the other thing to note is just the syntax here. So we've got our kind of main argument for the player is the pitch, or if it was a sample player, that would be our speech marks with our characters inside referring to different samples. And then we separate each keyword and its arguments with a comma. These can go in any order. So the pitch needs to go first, but the rest of it can go in any order. So don't think you have to remember a specific order that they go in, and you don't have to use all of them. You can pick and choose, and FoxDot has kind of default values it uses if you don't specify anything. So I've got a bit of a, I don't know, frog in my throat. Have some tea, hopefully that helps. So the second half of this workshop I called making it sound more interesting, because this is how you kind of make stuff sound more interesting. And it's not really easily categorizable what we're going to go through apart from that. So there's a couple of little things we're going to look at. The first one of those is about rhythms. So how we take our sample player play and how we create slightly more interesting rhythms within that. So we can use the de keyword as we used before, but there's also some shorthands which are great when you're just wanting to write like a really neat little drum sound or drum beat. You can use brackets, different kinds of brackets to do different things. So earlier we met a really simple classic drum beat, which is just this. So if you use the square brackets inside the speech marks, they play a slightly different role. So if you imagine each character in this pattern is one step. So we've got X, which is the kick drum, hyphen, which is the hi-hat, O, which is the snare, and hyphen, which is the hi-hat again. Each one of those is going to happen on a beat. If we put square brackets around one of those, around two of those, it divides that into one beat. So everything that's in the square brackets now is going to be one beat, and you're going to have a pattern within that. So if we listen, it probably makes more sense. So you can hear the double time hi-hat on the fourth beat. And you can put as many things inside those square brackets as you want, and it just crunches them down into the space of one beat. So we'll get like a kind of triple time one here. Or you can almost do like a kind of granular synthesis thing. Sounds like a kind of horrible synth. Doesn't have to be the same thing in here, so you could do something else. So you can create some quite interesting effects just with that. So this is nice if you want to have an offbeat. So remember as well, we can use space. So that creates that sort of slightly syncopated rhythm. And you can just mess about with this for like creating different kinds of patterns. It's nice if you want like triplets and things like that. And we can also use round brackets. So round brackets work a bit like how square brackets work in the rest of FoxDot, which is a little bit confusing. And what they do is they alternate each time. So here we've got the same beat. So we've got the kick, we've got the hi-hat, we've got the snare. And then on our fourth step, it's going to alternate between a hi-hat and a snare. And as we saw before, we can combine different types of brackets. So what's going to happen here is the first time round, on our fourth step, we're going to get a hi-hat. And our second time round, we're going to get a hi-hat and a snare on the half beat. And And you can make that way more complicated. Like I would struggle to explain how that would sound before I played it. So I'm not going to, I'll just play it for you. I think it's alternating between the hi-hat and then the half-time hi-hat and hi-hat, or half-time hi-hat and snare. Again, it's just quite fun if you are getting a bit stuck compositionally and you're not sure what you're doing, just to kind of chuck some brackets in and put some characters in and see what it sounds like, and then kind of work backwards from there, and just use your ear to decide what you like the sound of, what you don't like the sound of. Or you could also add, like, the other way of adding some variety as well is you can add your keyword argument. So we could also use de. So at the minute it's like 1. So we got, oh no, sorry, it's half. But we could create so what's happening is alternating between half duration and 1 duration. And then you've also got the square brackets, which are squashing the step down. So they kind of, again, the patterns overlap in the same way we saw them overlapping earlier. And I think it's worth noting here that the default tempo for the default duration for the player is half. The default duration for the synth players is 1. I think we could test that in a minute. But it just might trick you a little bit if you're like expecting something to come in at a certain pulse and it comes in at a different one. But if you're not sure, you could always just define it yourself, and then there's no guesswork involved. So moving on with our sample player, we could also use these curly brackets, and that what happens with those is that it chooses a sample from within the list at random each time. So on my keyboard, the curly brackets are the shift key and then the square brackets keys next to P. On a Mac, it might be somewhere different, so it might be worth locating those. So we can hear that. You can see it like played the hi-hat a lot of times, so it played the snare a lot of times. So you could also put like rests in here. So sometimes it's going to play. And the more times you put something in here, the more likely it is to happen. So if I put like that, and then I put like, I don't know, loads of these, you'll see that we get the more often than we get the hi-hat or the snare. So you can use it to create like an event that happens kind of infrequently or an event that happens frequently. So say you wanted it to be a rest most of the time, but every so often you wanted it to have a sound. You could put a load of spaces. So it's going to nearly always be a rest, but every so often you'll get the little tick sample. You could be waiting a long time though, so I won't make you wait for it. And again, you can combine those brackets in different ways. So here we've got square brackets within the curly bracket. So it means it's going to choose at random from the hi-hat or the 2 hi-hats in 1 beat or the snare. And again, that creates variety and a little bit of randomness, which can be quite nice sometimes. Just to remind you, I've been using control and full stop to stop it, but you could also call the stop argument with this d1.stop as well. So it's nice if you've got multiple things playing, which we'll be doing a bit more of next week, you can just stop and start them individually. Okie dokie. So we could also use keyword arguments. So I've sort of run over this a little bit already, so I won't go into loads of detail. So if you've got headphones, you'll be able to hear that panning from left to right, and you'll hear the change in duration. And then there's a keyword argument that you can use with the sample player that you can't really use with the synths to the same effect, which I think is quite important, bearing in mind that we're going to be focusing on samples and using our own samples next week. So it's this rate argument. And what that does is it changes not the duration of like when the sound is triggered, but it changes the playback rate of the sample itself. So if you ever had like an old school dictaphone, and if you held fast forward and play, it would like speed up the sound and it would sound really high pitched. It's the same effect basically. So I've got these examples here. I don't know if these are, so 1 is the default. So it's going to play it as we're used to hearing it. 2 is going to double the speed. So you can hear that the samples are like shorter and pitched up. 0.5 halves it. So you can hear particularly like on the drum sounds that it's like elongated. obviously these are not like particularly pitched samples that I'm using, but if you had, say, a vocal sample, in fact, I think there might be some in FoxDot. Is C1? No. And you can start to transform that sample away from the original sample quite radically. So while you're thinking about recording sounds around your house, like obviously you can use those sounds purely as you recorded them, but you can also transform them quite radically in quite an easy way in FoxDot. So you don't have to sit there with audio editing software. It kind of does all that stuff on the fly for you. A nice thing I like to do is put a negative number for rate, which will play the sample backwards. I think if you put round brackets, it'll play them backwards and forwards at the same time. I might be wrong about that. And you could also change the number so it plays them backwards and twice as slow, or backwards and twice as fast. You can create some interesting effects with that. And you can pattern the rate in the same way as you would pattern anything else that we've seen in FoxDot. So using your square brackets and your round brackets. There's also there's another function called p-shift, another keyword called p-shift in FoxDot, which changes the pitch, but it keeps the duration of the sample the same as well, I think. Yeah, let me just check. So let's do p-shift 1 to start with. If you compare that to rate, you can hear that it truncates the sample. So they have different effects, and you might want to use those differently depending on the effect that you're going for. Oh, there's stuff in the chat. Is there anything I need to attend to? So there you go. One step backwards sounds like no. I love playing stuff backwards. It's just really fun. They sound really weird and great. And also, you know, the situation that we're in lockdown, this is why we wanted to do stuff around the house, is that you might think around your house you have a really limited set of sounds, or, you know, what samples could you possibly record? You need to go out field recording somewhere really exciting to get something that sounds great. But actually, like, sound is just like a source material. So any little sound could be like tweaked and stretched and changed to be something really interesting. And that's something I'm personally really excited about and interested in with samples, is taking a sample and like recontextualizing it and making it sound like something different, and using that. You know, you could take one sample and turn it into 20 different sounds and create a whole composition just with one tiny sound recording that you made on your phone. And so I'd really encourage you to like get creative when you're thinking about stuff, and just test stuff out and experiment. And I think FoxDot's a great tool for experimenting with samples because it's so easy. You haven't got to sit there like clicking around in a big complicated audio editing software. You could just kind of get on with stuff. That's my little I don't know, inspirational rant aside. So another important keyword for working with samples, which you can do with synths as well, but I think you would primarily use it with samples, is the cut keyword. And what that does is it truncates the sample, so it won't necessarily play the whole thing. So again, this is great if you're recording samples yourselves and you might have something that's quite long, but you wanted to use it in a drum beat, or you only wanted to use a little section of it. You can use the cut argument. So without 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 sample being played, whereas if you use cut, it cuts it at half the duration that it's set to. So you can make this like 1 2 1 2 1. So that's cutting it off at like 0.12518. If you have a longer sample, these are short samples, so it probably won't make much difference. But if you have a longer sample, you can set it to cut like every 2 beats or something. So say you had a sample that's going to last 10 beats, you could cut it every 2 beats rather than every 1, or rather than every half. So you can still get some overlap, but you can control that a lot more. I don't think I've got any long samples loaded in, so I don't know if we'll be able to get the sound of it. Yeah, so you can see that cutting it a little bit. 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Again, I recommend just like getting your own samples and when we put our own samples in, just kind of experimenting with some of this stuff and see what sounds good, and you'll get a kind of feel for what works and what doesn't. I'm not sure why this print effects line is here because we're not doing effects yet, but remember that one for later. So I've mentioned it quite a lot, but we haven't done that much of it yet. So you can play multiple sounds at the same time using different players. So here we have melody and 2 different drum patterns. And if I wanted to make changes to one of those, I could just work on one at a time. So if we've got a drum beat running, I can maybe start messing about with the and then I can come in and start editing the drum beat as well. So you don't have to be kind of working about thinking about everything at the same time. And just making subtle changes to your keywords can make a really big difference. If you want to stop everything at once, you do command plus control plus full stop, or command plus full stop, or you can run this clock dot clear. It's the same thing. But if I had everything running and I just wanted to stop one thing, I could just do D2 dot stop, and it's going to stop my D2 player, which is the click. So you kind of can control stuff coming in and out that way as well. So you can see just with some really simple bits of syntax, we can start building up something that sounds a bit more musical, that sounds a bit more interesting. And you don't have to be thinking about everything at once. You can just start building stuff up slowly and creating greater complexity over time. So starting with a really simple drum beat and then editing that by changing some of the keywords or changing some of the numbers. You can kind of build stuff up over time. And I would really recommend watching, if you go onto YouTube and search for Ryan Kirkbride or for Innocent, they're like 2 really amazing FoxDot performers, and you can see how they start to build up a performance like piece by piece. So understanding that you don't have to sit there and write a huge line of code at once. You could just write something simple and then tweak it and then tweak it and add something and add something. Because you'll see people with like, you know, maybe like 20 keyword arguments in their code, but they probably haven't sat there and written that all. They probably like listen to it, tweak something, listen to it, tweak something, listen to it, tweak something like that, and build it up over time. So yeah, try not to let yourself get overwhelmed thinking about, oh, how am I going to set this? How am I going to set this? Just like listen and take your time and build stuff up over time. Okay, everyone okay there for now? Yes? Anything going on that I need to address? If you're like, by the way, if you're like away and like playing with stuff and you're like, oh, I don't get why this isn't working, or it doesn't sound like I expect it to, like feel free to shoot me an email anytime. I can't guarantee I'll get back to you straight away, but I will do my best to get back in a timely manner and help you out. Okay, so we're coming to the last little bit of FoxDot that we're going to do today, which is adding and sequencing effects. So the keywords and the arguments that we've been looking at so far have been a bit more about the sounds themselves, like how you're going to create a pattern or how you're going to change the pitch of something. But there's also heaps of effects in FoxDot that we apply in like a really similar way to other keywords. So the syntax should be familiar to you. It's just kind of learning a little bit about what they do and when you might use them. So we're going to start with this blip sound, whenever it launches. And we're going to just start adding different effects to that. So you'll see again that the syntax is the same as we're familiar with. We have a comma, we have a new keyword, and then we have the argument to that keyword. So in this case, we're going to add an echo effect, and the timing of that's going to be 0.5, so it's going to be an echo on like a half beat basically. And again, you can like pattern those in the same way that you're used to. So echo is quite nice, and you can use this the same in a sample player as well. So I've used it here in a synth, but we could do like, and then because it's overlapping with the. Yeah, that's better. Sometimes the echo, like because the H, like the click sound, is quieter than the bass drum. The click echo was happening when the bass drum was triggering, so you couldn't hear it, but it was there. So some other cool effects that I like. One is this high pass filter, which the shortcut for it's HPF. So if people who don't know how filters work, they just filter out particular frequencies. So the most common two are a low pass filter and a high pass filter. And they kind of do what they say. So a high pass filter will only let frequencies above the threshold through. It's pretty easy just to listen to it. So here we've got our drum beat. If we set our filter at 500, I think it's 500 hertz. Don't know. You'll hear that like the lower pitch sounds have been filtered out, and it sounds kind of more tinny and high up. If you set that even higher, you're only letting through those like really high pitch sounds. Again, you can pattern that. So you can have that like filter kind of, it's called a filter sweep, like comes on and off at the state, over time. So a low pass filter does the opposite. So it only lets the low frequencies through. So it gives this kind of like underwater type sound. So you might use like a really high value low pass filter if you've got like maybe some noise, like high pitched noise in your recording or something like that. So it won't sound that different. That's the unfiltered version. That's the filtered version. But you might use a low threshold to really emphasize the bass notes in your sound. And again, that's really nice if you've got samples that you've recorded but you want to change the character of them. Using filters is a really easy way to do that. And again, you can put patterns in here. Then we've got chop. So chop basically chops the signal into parts. Let's just try with no chop to start with. So we've got our pluck sound. So you can hear it's now being sliced up. And again, you can almost do a bit of like granular synthesis with this. If you put a really high value chop, chopping the sound into so many small parts, it's almost changing the character. And you can pattern that as well. Different character that lends. I've just basically chosen some of my favorite effects. There's actually heaps. So if you do that print.effects line we saw earlier, it shows you a whole big list of them here. So the name of the effect is here. So reverb, the keyword that you use in your syntax is room, and then it tells you what the arguments are if you need to add any additional arguments, and there's heaps of stuff in there. So you can kind of explore those in your own time. There's also really good documentation on the FoxDot website as well, actually, which I should have mentioned earlier. That explains kind of how all of these work for. So 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. That gives a nice character to your sample, and maybe kind of reframes it a little bit. Where have I got this little sustain bit? We already talked about sustain, so I'll just show you in action again. So using sustain, I think I put it because it's the interaction between sustain and chop. So you can see there that it gives it a really different character over the kind of default sustain and chop. And then increasing the sustain. Because what it's doing is instead of chopping something that's holding for one note into 8 parts, it's chopping something that's held for 4 notes into 8 parts. So it kind of changes the rhythm that falls out of that. I feel like I haven't explained that very clearly, but maybe just use your ear and listen to it and have a go, and that might make a bit more sense. I guess the main point is that if you combine these different kind of keywords and effects, you get stuff that sounds really different. And I think, again, I would just encourage you to think about the kind of character of the sounds. And when you go away and record your sounds this week, like thinking about the character of those sounds as you record them and how you might kind of use those or combine them together in different ways is like a good thing to keep in the back of your mind. What else have we got here? Okay, let's do last one for now. So shape is a kind of distortion. It's a wave shape distortion. So we listen with no distortion. Yeah, really low to that character. And sweep that So that gives a kind of nice effect as well. And again, you can apply that on samples. And then my final line of code here is just to kind of show you what happens if you put different effects together. So we've got here room, which is basically sets the amount of reverb. So room is like the size of the reverb. The larger the number, the kind of more reverby it's going to be. And then mix is like how much of that reverb's applied to how wet or dry the signal is. So if you listen to that sound just like pure, with no arguments, sounds like that. It's not that exciting. But you can see by just adding a really small amount of effects and patterning in a different way, we get something that sounds a lot more interesting. And obviously you can put notes in. I don't know. I'm just going to do something random. So hopefully you can see that with quite a small amount of code, you can start to create something that sounds like a little bit different from just like, oh, here's a kick drum sample, or here's a really basic synth sound. And we'll be able to do that with sounds that you've recorded yourself next week. I would super recommend when you go away from this, just like playing about with the code that I've given you, try some stuff out. Don't be afraid of breaking it. Like I said, you could always download a fresh worksheet if you accidentally delete everything or you scramble it or whatever. If you do something that you like, save it, copy and paste it into a new file so you've got like nice snippets of code that we can use next week. Don't feel you have to spend like hours and hours learning everything off by heart by any means, because we've always got the worksheet to refer to, and I can kind of go through specific things with you next week if there's specific stuff you're interested in. But yeah, I think that's the kind of basics I wanted to show you with FoxDot. Anyone got any questions before I move on? Are we good? What's in the chat?
Can you just show us the saving process?
Yes, I can do that. Sorry, yeah. So it's really simple. If you just go to File and Save. I always do Save As because I think it saves them in like a really weird hidden Python file if you just press Save. So Save As, and you can chuck your file wherever you want. So if I stuck it on my desktop and I called it Site Workshop, it saves as a .py file. Don't try and open that file directly because it will open it in Python, which won't do what you want it to do. So I mean, it won't break anything, but it won't open in FoxDot, so you won't be able to run the code and speak to supercollider in the way you'd expect. What you want to do is if you want to open something you've been working on, you launch supercollider, you launch FoxDot, and you'll be met with a blank screen like this. And you just go to File, Open, and find your file that you were working on, double click it, and it will load up the code there for you. So everything will be there as you've been working on it. So you can see like the changes that I made earlier have loaded up. If I wanted to just load a fresh worksheet again, I could just go Open. It's in my downloads file. And I would just open that file, and you'll see this is like the pure worksheet that no one's messed about with. So you can just reload that, download a fresh copy, whatever you need to do.
Phil is asking who are the musicians that you mentioned?
I'll put them in the chat. So Ryan Kirkbride and Innocent Granger, but he just goes by Innocent, and they're both on YouTube. I can send some links around actually. Kirkbride. So Ryan's the guy who invented FoxDot. So he invented it as he did a master's in computer music, and his undergraduate degree's in computer science. He did a master's in computer music, and for his final project he built FoxDot, which is like absolutely incredible tool for somebody to make with a student. So thanks to Ryan, without whom none of this would be possible. Right, everyone happy? Right, we've got 10 minutes left, so I am going to quickly just talk a little bit about what I want you guys to do over the coming week. Like, I feel like I'm setting you homework. It's like, don't feel like you have to go spend hours doing this whatsoever. Like, I probably spent like 5 or 10 minutes this morning while I was making coffee, recording a couple of sounds around the house on my phone. You can definitely do this using a smartphone or a tablet. If you've got like a fancy sound recorder, like a Zoom or something, like please use it. But don't feel that if you don't have one, you're going to be missing out, because like phones these days, like I have a pretty crappy like £100 smartphone, and the like microphone on it is great. It records really well. So if you've got an iPhone, I think it comes with a sound recording app by default. If you don't, you can just, there's heaps in the Google Play Store that you can download for free. I use one that's called, I'll show you the symbol actually. It's just called like Voice Recorder or something like that. Looks like, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. It's like that little red circle with a microphone on it. And it's nice because it lets you like name the files as you record them, which I find really helpful. Peter's got something else.
Sorry, that voice memo is the iPhone one.
Memo. There you go. So iPhone users, you can use that. And so I've got a worksheet that I'll get Peter to email round everybody, which kind of talks you through step by step what I want you to do. But basically, the idea is for you to kind of go around your house, find some sounds that you want to record them, do a teeny little bit of editing on them, which I'm going to show you now. And then next week, we'll learn how to put them into FoxDot and use them and start composing stuff based on what we've learned today. I would really recommend that you plan the sounds you're going to record and then record them one by one. Because if you go around just like recording stuff, you'll end up with like loads of like long recordings. You can't remember what stuff is. You have loads of stuff to listen through to. So I'd really recommend being like, okay, I'm going to make this sound with my, I don't know, pen. I'm going to make this sound with my window. I'm going to make this sound with my curtain. And then do takes of those sounds until you're happy with each one by one. Just because like I have run like these kind of workshops before doing sound recording, and people get really excited, and myself included, and I go around like pointing the microphone at everything, and then it's really hard to figure out what I've actually done afterwards. It makes your life a lot more difficult down the line. But I stepped through all of that in the worksheet. So
yeah,
go on, Peter.
And when you're recording, just be very careful not to create sounds with your handling noise. So hold it very, very still.
Yeah, that's really important. So something I always find as well, I live on quite a busy road, and there's always cars going past outside. But when I'm recording stuff at home, I'm focused on the sound I'm recording. I don't hear the car go by. And then I listen to the recording back and I'm like, oh, a car went by. That's really annoying. So I would also recommend like listen back straight away after you've recorded something to make sure you're happy with it. If you're not happy with it, do another take. Like, it's also a bit tricky when you're just recording with your phone. You don't have a lot of control over the volume. So you might need to get closer to something or be a bit further away. Remember that the microphone is like in the bottom of your phone, not the top. So point the bottom of your phone towards the thing you want to record, not the top of your phone. And again, just like listen back and see if it's clear, because like literally just turning your phone around like that will make such a difference to how something sounds. Maybe you want the effect of it pointing the other way, but it will have an effect and it will sound different. But also don't worry about it too much. If you don't have time or you're not happy with any of the sounds you find, there's a really good website called freesound.org, which I've mentioned in the worksheet that you'll get. So you can just go on there and download some sounds. They're like licensed free sounds that you can use however you like.
Also, our Society of Explorers, the young people's group at site, I've got a whole library of different types of samples of like just them hitting different objects.
So that's cool.
So you're welcome to share them as well if that's useful.
Yeah, could you share that round when you contact people? That'd be great. That'd be really good. So like I said, I've got loads of detail in the worksheet I'm sending you, but I just wanted to quickly kind of show you what Audacity looks like, because that's the bit of software we're going to use to edit sounds. because I appreciate some of you may not have done any kind of audio editing before. What we're doing is super, super simple. If you can't get your head around it or you mess it up or whatever, don't worry, because there'll be time in the next session for me to troubleshoot and help you sort your samples out. But just as a basic, if you open Audacity, it looks like this. So you'll have this kind of gray box here, which is where you load the sounds into. Get your sounds on your computer, like email them to yourself, or like put a cable in and drag them over. And then you can literally just drag the files into Audacity like that, and it will load it up as a sound file. Listen to it. So you can hear there's like quite a lot of silence at the start. I don't want that, because I don't want every time I trigger the sample in FoxDot for it to take like 3 seconds before it plays. So we're going to just trim the silence or any noise from the start and end of the sample, which is super easy. You look at the sound wave so you can see what's going on. If you want a closer look, you can zoom in. You click and highlight the bit you want to get rid of. Maybe I should zoom back out again actually so you can see what I'm doing a bit better. So you like click and highlight the bit you want to get rid of, and you press these scissors and cut it. Have a listen. And I also want to get rid of that silence at the end. That's literally what we're doing. If you're like, if you know a bit about audio editing, like feel free to do other stuff as well. But as a basic, that's what you want to do. So just make sure you're happy with it. If it's like playing from the end, you just need to you use this little green triangle up here to put your record back at the start. That's it. Or you can change the position down here. Then you just need to re-export that so that you have a new file that's just the sound that you want to keep. So again, like all this is step by step in the instructions I'm sending out, so don't feel you have to remember. I just wanted to show it to you so it wasn't completely unfamiliar. So you go to File, Export as WAV, because that's the best format for FoxDot to read, and choose where you're going to put it. So I would probably recommend having like a file for your raw sound file. So I've called this one sound clips, where you put in like the raw recordings that you've made, and then create a new folder for your edited sounds and just call it oops, what happened there? Like edited clips, and then just put it in there. You'll probably get this like little pop-up for metadata. Like if you really wanted to put comments in about what the sound was or something like that, like please feel free, but I just ignore it and press OK. And then as a final check, I will go into that folder, edited clips, and I'll just have one more listen to the sound to make sure I'm happy with it. And I'm happy with that. So that's then ready to be imported into FoxDot, which I'll show you how to do next week. Okay, I'm done talking. If anyone's got any last questions, I hope I haven't completely overwhelmed you. Like I said, please feel free to shout me with questions on email in the week. Please have a go with FoxDot if you can. If you didn't manage to get installed, me and Pete will work with you to make sure you've got everything up and running for next week. And we'll send you out the worksheets and everything so that you know what you're doing with the kind of recording exercise at home. I'd really just encourage you to go wild. I would say maybe try and get at least 5 sounds, but if you only get 1, that's also fine. Or we can, send you some round or whatever. Don't feel like you won't be able to take part next week if you don't get a chance to do the homework, is what I'm saying, because there'll still be plenty to do.